All right, Mutia. Thank you
Sir,
for allowing me to interview.
thank you for
So,
having me.
right, it's absolutely a pleasure. Would you mind telling our audience who you are? Oh, my bad. Actually, for those who don't know me, I'm the host of this podcast. My name is Carlton. I'm a computer engineer and I'm also an author. I'm currently writing my first book, which should be ready by the end of next year. I'm the host of the Through My Lens podcast, and today we have with me my good friend. We went to the same high school together. He's someone I have huge respect for and admire, and we have some history together. So yeah, we're really glad to have him. And yeah, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you as
Ah,
well?
okay, thank you. Deb Kababla Mutia, the second. Software engineer by training, so that's what I did in school. But currently, my day-to-day job is a solution architect. I'm also an entrepreneur. I have a business that I have co-founded with friends in software products and just other digital solutions that we're providing for our partners. So yeah, that's really what I do. I'm very interested in technology in all any side of tech. I'm really passionate about technology. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Incredible. That's incredible. Some of the recollections I have about Muccia here is he was the one guy that could answer a physics question in his sleep.
Yeah.
So he's really it's really incredible, and I think there's so much we can learn from him today. So according to your academic history, you graduate your education history, but you graduated from the National Polytechnic Institute in Yaoundé, which is often esteemed as one of the highest and the most prestigious engineering schools for Cameroon. Can you tell us a bit about that, how you got in, and what your experience in there was like, and how that
Yeah.
has contributed to your career?
Yeah. It was, I think it was a perfect experience for me, even though it wasn't always a good one. Um, we have an entrance exam for those who don't know. We have an entrance
Mm.
exam so that everybody writes to get into the school, and usually every year they take about 200 students into first year. And usually, on average, you could have anything between 8,000 to 10,000 people writing that exam, right? So you have all these people getting in to write their preparatory classes, there's all of this, and you're writing the entrance exam. So for me, it really was a shot in the dark. I wasn't that confident that I would make it in, especially when I have this experience. I was late on the first day of the exam, so I got in when everybody was already in their hall. Yeah, so I was a few minutes late, but everybody was already in their hall and they were getting ready to start giving out the question sheets. And so we were about 15 people per hall, right? So I get my question sheet and I'm answering. It's MCQ, and I answer and I reach a certain point and I'm feeling confident about my answers, right? And I take a look around the room and I realize not everybody's quite confident, right? So like you see some people are hesitating, some people really don't know what to write. And in that
Right.
moment, I feel like I've got a good chance of entering, right? So then we finish that paper and we have a break. And when I go out during my break, I see everybody coming out of their halls. And in that whole building, we were about 3,500 of us. And that's when it hit me that the odds are way less than I thought. You see, so it was really crazy that experience that realization that I had when I went out and I saw the whole crowd of people, and that was just one building. There were two centers in Yaoundé. There were other centers around the country. So, yeah, it was an experience. But yeah, I finally got in. Fortunately, then there was a lot of things that I had to adapt to. It's a French system of education. We did the English system of education here in Cameroon. So yeah,
Right.
there was a lot that we had to learn. Sometimes you could know French, day-to-day French, but not necessarily the kind of French they use in maths. For example, it's slightly different. So
Absolutely.
there's some things you got to
Absolutely.
learn. There's some adaptation that has to come into place. And then the school itself is very challenging, right? Because they take a curriculum that could be about 1 or 2 years in another university or maybe even an Ivy League school, and they do it in one semester. And so the rate of learning is very fast. And since it's very fast, in as much as these people are allegedly the top 200 or top certain people in the whole country, it's so fast that you get to start failing, right? And failing academically was a new experience for me, right, in a way. And for most of the people that were failing,
definitely know that.
yeah. So, and also I think for almost every other person that was in the school, right? Because from wherever they're from, they are la creme de la creme, and they come to the school. Everything is moving at a neck break speed, and then you end up with a 220 in a test, you end up with a 520 on a test, and it's a new experience. You're getting to learn. But what I would say is it's a humbling experience, right? Because you realize that there's always more intelligent people, because even as we were all moving at neck break speed, there were still the people that would still not read and have an 18 on 20, or the people that would just be chilling, Yeah, so there's always those people, right? Even in the top 200, there's a top 1%. So the 1% of the 1%, as they call it. So fast forward, I do the first 2 years. I managed to get into third year, and I managed to get into the computer science department, because the way it works there is everybody does maths and physics in their first 2 years. And then you would submit yes, general stuff, maths and physics. Then for third year is where you get into a department. But getting into a department is not entirely your choice. So you would submit a list of all the departments in your order of preference. And then, based on academic results, they would let the top people get into their departments first. And then if a department is full, they would start putting the others in their second or third choice, just depending on the population. So they try to spend it here. So I was very worried because I wasn't top in my class. I was good enough, right? But in my year, computer science was the department where every single person wanted to get into. So I was slightly worried. I managed to get into computer science, and it's been from there, computer science, software engineering, right up to where I am now. Yeah, so that's kind of the experience. I would say, just to end this, it's a very humbling experience because it's extremely challenging, especially given the background of most of the people that are there, But what I would say is it gave me confidence that I didn't know I needed, because in a sense, I feel like I've been at my worst, right? I feel like I've been in situations where I didn't think I would be able to achieve what I had to achieve, and I achieved it regardless. So it was very humbling, but it was also very enriching as an experience, personally.
100%. That's truly amazing. I mean, the typical transformation story, right? What you least expect is that which will transform you. So I love that. I love the sound of that. So how did you become interested in? Because we're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to heavily focus on artificial intelligence today, and we're going to be talking about the impact of AI and opportunities for exploitation, opportunities that Africans can exploit in artificial intelligence, and how we can use AI to help our economies, business, education, and all of that. So can you just tell us a little bit about how you got interested in AI? Did you know about it when you founded your first company? anchored with your crew, and what has been your experience with AI so far?
Okay, so I think I'll just preface that with how I got into just computer science in general, right? Because I think there's a similar note to it all. Um, to summarize the story, or to be brief, I got into coding when I was young because I wanted to play games, right? Um, in our house growing up, we didn't have video games, and so basically, I would always hear about people playing video games in school. You know, like you go to school, people are talking about GTA Vice City, talking about the God of War, and I couldn't relate to that experience.
Mm.
And so later on, I was able to convince my dad to install internet at home. And basically, as soon as the internet was installed, I started looking up how to download games, right? So I wasn't quite successful, but there was this app. I've forgotten the name. I downloaded. They were saying you could play and make games. Really, I was just interested in the play part of the thing, right? Just playing games. So I downloaded it, and well,
Yeah.
basically, I couldn't really play any of the games. I don't know, there was something there. So I was like, okay, let me just look at the other side of how do they make games, right? And I think I was very naive because I kind of expected something like you draw. Games are very visual, right? I was expecting something where you draw like paint, or that you just drag and drop a few things, and then I open it up, and to my surprise, it's a blank page, and I see a cursor blinking at me, and I'm like, okay, wait. So what's supposed to happen here? Am I supposed to
What's
write the game I
happening?
want? And
What's
like,
happening right here?
what's happening? So I did some research, realized what they call a programming language, and I went down to that rabbit hole now into programming. It wasn't really like a robust programming language, but it was like some sort of pseudo language that they had created for that app. So I got into that rabbit hole, started testing out stuff, and that was how I got into programming and computer science in general. And so the first time I heard of AI, right, it's, due to the proliferation of the term today, there is this thing where AI is synonymous to large language models like ChatGPT, right? But the field of artificial intelligence is much broader than that. So the first time I hear about AI is still in the gaming space, right? Because they call everything in a game that is not human controlled is called the AI, right? So if you've played FIFA, right? So when you're controlling a player in FIFA, the other 10 players on your side of the field are controlled by the AI. And same thing goes for your opponents if you guys are playing a one-on-one match. So that's how I got familiar with the term AI. And then I started getting into what we know as the AI of today much later, when I was doing computer science in Polytechnic, right? And that was more into the space of machine learning. And I found it
Okay.
quite interesting, right? Just as 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 a term, or as a technique, because normally from our study of computers, they don't learn, right? Computers, we knew as computer science students that, that computers were dumb. They were the dumbest thing that could ever exist. You give
Hmm.
them a bunch of
Hmm.
instructions and they will do exactly that, right?
And the
No
yeah,
matter how absurd the
absolutely.
instructions are, yeah, like they just obey instructions. And then we start learning about machine learning and how that could be applied in artificial intelligence. And it just naturally sparked my curiosity, right? And so I went down a rabbit hole of, there's a lot of statistics into it, statistics, machine learning, then deep learning. And then you start getting into the kind of things that we have today with ChatGPT and all these other products that we have.
Incredible. So it was from a very young age that you started, interacting uh, with technology. So
Yeah.
now today we have, I mean, we've come a long way, right? So we've come from
Yeah.
just basic statistics, from things as rudimentary as the Morgan's theorem to the very first and the most basic machine learning algorithms like the linear regression. And we've graduated, gone up to the XGBoost, we've gone up to tensors, and right now we've gone to perceptrons. From perceptrons, we've gone to CNNs, and right now we are dealing with LLMs, and they seem to be everybody's favorite form of AI. And just exactly like you mentioned, it's the most recognizable to most people, and most people identify AI as LLMs. So can you just tell us about that, the history, that progression in brief, so people can understand what we're talking about?
Yeah. So, a significant part of all these techniques that we use today actually were developed a long time ago. Like you mentioned, the perceptron, linear regression, a lot of these things developed in the 90s, right? And so there was a promise that these things could work, right? But a lot of people were skeptical, you see. And so basically we have linear regression, which is using statistical formulas to be able to learn a probability distribution across a population or a set of events or things like that. So it's basically saying that we know that this event follows a probability distribution. We don't know exactly what it is, but we can find an algorithm that is going to allow us to learn the parameters that govern that probability distribution, and then from there we can predict future events. So that's basically the gist of it. And that mindset applies to every single thing that we know today in machine learning, deep learning, LLMs. It's literally the same thing. The first is the assumption that there is an underlying probabilistic distribution that is governing how these events are happening. And then we are using algorithms to estimate as closely as possible the underlying distribution so that we can predict to a certain level of accuracy what is going to happen. Everything right now is a prediction, right? Yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing is, so we had most of these techniques, right, available to us in the 90s, but they didn't really kick off, mainly because of lack of data, right? So the Web 1.0 comes through, we start having web pages, and the significant point actually starts when we have Web 2.0. And that's the first time where we have websites and we have users around the world on those websites contributing to those websites. So it could be like Facebook, where you're commenting on somebody's post, or you are posting your post, and everybody is adding information all at the same time to the same platform. That meant that there was an information overload on the internet, and that allowed us to have much more data than had ever been accumulated in the history of humanity. And so now, using those same techniques, they realized that there was a significant bump in performance just by increasing the amount of data that these algorithms are processing, right? And that's the first thing, is the availability of the data. And so when they realized that the data was enough and the data wasn't the bottleneck anymore, they started to they started to increase the complexity of this algorithm, since there was enough data. And as they increased the complexity of the algorithms with increasing data, we started to see more and more interesting results. So for example, there was the whole problem of recognizing objects in images, right? And we had convolutional neural networks, which is something that existed for a very long time. But when we reached the point where we had enough data, so we had millions of pictures that these algorithms could go through and adjust their parameters, then we're able to see significant progress in how they were used, and we could see larger and larger and larger networks of neurons. Another thing that contributed to this is also just an increase in compute, right? We had better compute in 2020 or 2016 or 2018 than we did in 1996. So with more compute and more data, those two things were enough for us to leverage to have the system that we have now today. So we have things like there are different I would say tasks when we talk of machine learning or deep learning. Some tasks are purely,
That's interesting.
everything is a prediction. Yes, yes, but some tasks would be just to decide a binary prediction, like trying to predict if you're going to buy a product or not. You see, like on a web page. Some things could be trying to estimate a figure, so it could be studying your financial decisions over time and trying to predict what
Time
your
series
yearly
prediction for the
income
stock
is going
market.
to be. Exactly. Yeah. So like a
Mm-hmm.
time series, that kind of stuff. So there's time series, there's image set of tasks, there's language, and we have all these different things. We have reinforcement learning as well, which is more dynamic in what it can do. So there's different techniques, different tasks, and we have just been evolving in all these different spaces all at the same time. For example, we have Google that came up with Alpha Alpha Zero, right, which is like an AI that plays chess. It learns to play on its own, so it learns by playing itself, and that was really just reinforcement learning that was applied to it. And yeah, it's one of the best engines that we have today in chess. We also have all the work that it did for AlphaFold, which was the machine learning that they did to be able to to predict protein sequences and protein structure, right? So there's all of that is happening right now. There's also language models, large language models, which garner most of the attention nowadays. And I think it's really because, and I want to clarify, I don't think large language models are intelligent, but I think they are the one thing that get all the attention today because as humans, language is the way we communicate intelligence, right? Um, I would meet somebody and it's the way we speak because it's the only way for us. Anyway, it's not the only way, but it's the main way as a species that we use to communicate thought. In be it spoken or written, it has always been language, right? So the fact that we have these models, because really what these AI models are doing is very simple. Like I said, remember I told you everything is a prediction, right? So these models are just simply able to predict what a human would have said or what the average human would have said in a particular scenario,
Next word,
right?
next word, next
Because
word.
they have access next word, next word, next word. That's really just it because they have access to all these large corpus of text gotten from the internet. You could imagine Twitter, Instagram, just blogs, personal blog sites, just the whole internet, right? And they scrape these websites and they train these models and basically they just learn the parameters to be able to generate next words and they are able to simulate what the average human could be, right? Or in more specialized models, because some models have more specialized data that they use to train, then it's really just simulating what the data set suggests that a response would be in that case.
Very interesting. That's a good, very nice summary of how far we've come with this AI thing. Which is interesting to me because, I mean, from one, there was a point in time in history where to think of the whole progress. There's a time in history where the only form of computation we could do was just, adding numbers with a very rudimentary material, like, for example, the abacus, right? The abacus, which is actually the concept of computation, which is a very, very important thing in computing history. That's where we started. Now being able to generate videos from just simple text instruction, really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into a topic that I'm really excited to talk about because I haven't seen people talk about this, and if I'm being honest, I don't even know if people are interested in this or people do talk about these things. So we want to talk about AI and its impact on Africa. So do you think what's the rate of adoption of AI in Africa and especially Cameroon? Do you see people interacting with it? Is it being used in business? Are people adopting AI as a as a means to progress economic and social development?
Yeah. So, um, I think on the onset, right? So when what we know as like the modern day AI is starting, right? It's starting really in the West, you see, and on our side there wasn't a lot of development, right? Because I think that's the way it has been for a while. We are usually playing catch up, and so the main implication of that was that for most AI developments, they weren't really suited to the African context or the Cameroonian context, because you remember it's all about a prediction, and what we're trying to predict is an underlying probability distribution. But if your data doesn't have or doesn't come from a certain area, then usually whatever model you have does not apply in that area. You see,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
yeah,
so that will usually mean that, for example, if we take there's this usual toy AI example in most AI classes. You would see this like as the first like the first project that students would do is called MNIST, and it's like a data set of like sign language, right? So it just hands sign language, and then the computer is able to look at an image of a hand and tell you what it's saying or what number is there. But a lot of models that use that data set cannot work with dark skin hands, because there is no dark skin hand in that data set. You see, and that's one of the things that you always have to be aware in when we're talking about AI in
outline.
any
Right.
scenario. Yes,
Mm.
because the way it's going to predict things will always depend on how the data was collected, right? So in the first paradigm of programming, it was garbage in, garbage out. You just say what you want and it's going to do. In this paradigm, it's about the data. You collect garbage data, you have garbage results, because the algorithms learn from the data basically. And so there was this inherent disadvantage. Over time and in the more recent years, there has been a lot of work on the African side of things, with respect to image recognition, inclusion in larger data sets, translations, because a lot of the languages that were done for tasks like language translation was usually English,
Yeah,
French,
that's
Chinese,
right.
yeah. But nowadays, I think like you see Google that does translation from English to Twi, which is spoken in Ghana. So there's been a lot of effort to include. There's also been a lot of Africans getting into the machine learning space, as it's getting more ubiquitous. So there's a lot of that is happening, right? And so we can see a lot of people, in Africa, there's a lot of individuals that are doing a lot. But from a systemic point of view, there's not a lot of effort that or emphasis put into AI. It's true. I think it's a general thing, because most governments really don't know what to make of AI. It's something that just came up as if out of
Absolutely.
nowhere. And
Hmm.
we're still really trying to figure out the regulatory implications and all of that. But just in Cameroon, because I it's based on my experience. I see, for example, students that are in high school like us when we used to be in high school, using these models to revise questions in physics, just to ask basic questions, So there's some that is done, or there's some use of I think, but I think it can be even more helpful in our scenario, like in our context here in Africa.
And even it can be better exploited, to solve very very particular problem. Hmm.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
for sure,
So,
for sure.
how do you see how do you see what's your take on the future of AI and its effects on it's a global effect? Like, how do you see, where do you see us going from here?
Yeah. So there is going to be a lot of automation, right? There's going to be a lot of automation, and for now, I'll take the global case, and then I'll try to look at it in the African context, right? Because this thing is going at net break speed. Technological advances are always exponential in nature. So the more we do, the faster it is to do what we're doing. Yeah, and we just keep doing that. So there's going to be a lot of automation. That's the first thing. What that means generally, if we compare it to the Industrial Revolution, it means there'll be a lot of loss of jobs. But what that also usually means is that the standard of living is going to increase generally, because if a lot of stuff is being automated, then it means things that were menial tasks to do now are things that are cheaper to do. And so just in general, it's cheaper to live as a person. And that's when we start getting the full maturity of AI and all of that. So that's a good thing. Another thing is we are able to use these algorithms to do not just things that we could have done, but things that we didn't even think we could do, right? An example could be Google DeepMind, that is using AI to predict the three-dimensional structure of proteins. And normally this was a task that, based on the normal medical way of doing it, the task of mapping out all the 3D structures of all the proteins that we know today would have taken hundreds of years, right? But now, with that algorithm today, we're able to map everything out. True, it's a certain degree of inaccuracy, but that's a large step forward than we could have ever thought. Yeah. So there's a lot of these things in healthcare, in quantum computing, where it's allowing us to leverage the data that we have to then get information that we can use in our day-to-day lives, right? That's the second thing, and those are very good things. The third thing, I think, which now can be a negative, is what I'll call misinformation. And this is mostly coming in from the side of AI that is generative, right? Because there's AI that just predicts stuff, but there's AI that generates stuff, and it generates it still from a predictive way of working, but still generating stuff. And this could be image generation, it could be text generation, like we have for large language models, and it could be video generation. And the thing is that the algorithms that we have today have no understanding of what I call truth, right? Because we human beings have an understanding of truth. If I ask you right now to tell me a story, you can tell me a story, and you, the same person that told me the story, can tell me whether it's a true story or not, right? And then we can have the consensus. But when the algorithm is generating text, there is no notion of truth. It is just generating what it generated, right? And whatever it generated is what it's going to present to you, because it doesn't reason, and it doesn't have a way to experience the world. I think that is what grounds us in our truth, the fact that we experience the world, you see, and it allows us to know what is possible and what is not possible, or what could happen or what couldn't happen, you see. And that is something that is still a challenge with large language models. I think it's a similar thing with image generation and video generation. You see, earlier models of image generators would generate human beings with 6 fingers, just a mouthful of teeth, and just a bunch of crazy stuff, because it had no way of experiencing the world, you see. It was just picking up things that it was seeing in the data. And maybe, hands are tricky. We don't know hands are tricky because we're human beings and our brains are adapted to recognizing hands. But hands are tricky because in one image, my hand could be like this and I have no fingers. And in another image, my hand could be like this and you see just 2 fingers. And basically, from a series of pictures, it's almost impossible for you to know how many fingers a human being should have, right? we know what a human being should have because we experience human beings every single
Right.
day, and we know that a human being has to have 5 fingers. But the algorithm is just in a bunch of pictures. In some pictures, it sees 1 finger, and some pictures it sees 2, some pictures it sees 3, and it's like, but what's to say that it can't be 6 fingers, And it just generates these images, and it's really just based on the underlying data that it has. That's how it builds up its perception of what the probability distribution should be. And I think we're seeing a similar thing with video models that are generating video. OpenAI just released their Sora model for generating pictures. And if you ask it, for example, to generate a video of an athlete doing gymnastics at the Olympics, it's a fever dream, and because it has never experienced, yeah, true, man. And because it has never experienced the physical world, it doesn't even know what gravity is, right? It just has learned from what it was fed, but it doesn't know what gravity is. It might not understand what momentum is, right?
Right? I mean, like
Exactly.
In a real sense.
Yes, you see, in a real sense. And so even just small things like object permanence, when we're young, there's this thing where we learn object permanence, where we realize that the fact that you don't see an object doesn't mean that the object doesn't exist anymore.
Doesn't exist,
right? And so if somebody is walking and they go behind something, you expect them to come on the other side. They haven't just disappeared, you see. But you would see, for example, the videos that are generated, something would cross the line of sight and not exist anymore, you see. And so those are the kinds of things that you have when it's just really an algorithm. For now, it's really just we have an algorithm. It's looking through data. It's determining variables that allow it to the best of its ability to predict what the underlying probability distribution is. And that's all what it's doing. And so, yes, there's the whole misinformation aspect, because right now people can generate texts. A lot of people have started to use these large language models instead of their search bars. So there's a possibility that what large language model tells you is not true, and you have to fact check that. There's image generation that is very photorealistic. So people can generate pictures of Trump being indicted, of the president of your nation being dead, for example. And so that's one major cause for concern with AI as well. So I think that's the global context. Now, in the African context,
Right.
and I'm speaking basically, I'm in Cameroon, and there's this, I don't know how it is in Eastern Africa. I know you're in Eastern Africa, but I don't see a heavy emphasis on AI, because AI is very intentional, right? If you're setting out to create a model, you have to make sure you're gathering data that allows you to perform the task you want to do, you see. And so data, in a sense, is the new oil, because you need data. You have to be getting data every single time. And there isn't much of an emphasis, or I haven't seen a lot of emphasis on gathering data in our context, right? Because that is what we should be doing if we're to start leveraging AI in our context. We have to get data, medical data, plant data, soil data, as much data as we can lay our hands on, because that is what is going to allow us to leverage AI to the best of our ability in our context to solve our problems. Because the Googles, they can do whatever they are or whatever they want to do, but if they're not getting first-hand data in our context, we could use it, we could have workarounds, but it wouldn't be what will be the best place for us to use in our context. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I'm seeing it in a general sense of where things are going.
So the problem is there is no emphasis on data collection. There is no we're not tagging data with the same level of importance as the West. That's a really, really interesting perspective, especially as someone who really understands how the quantity of data can really affect an algorithm's performance, and the accuracy and all of that. So So
Yeah.
why is that the case? Is it because of the fear of AI? Is it because of the lack of education on the importance of collecting this data? However crude the method is, it could just be just even by survey. Traditional questionnaire and with pen and paper. That still works, but from what you're saying, it's like we don't do any of that. So why
Yeah.
do you what do you think is the reason why this data collection is it education? Is it high level of illiteracy? Is it poverty? What's happening?
Yeah, yeah. I think you raised a lot of factors that are all contributing to this. Also, I would just want to say that there's a lot of effort that is already being done currently in the African context to gather data, right? I wouldn't want to paint a picture where nothing is being done, but I do believe that we are doing less than we could be able to be doing right now. And yeah, it relates a lot to the factors you mentioned. We have higher levels of illiteracy. There's poverty. For example, in a country where it's hard for us to go a month without a power outage, right? And even just in terms of priority, you know, um, there's those things that we have to face. But there's education, and I think it's not that we don't have educated people. It's that it seems for whatever reason, and maybe you could or we could discuss, right? The people that are the most educated to lead certain fields are not given those places of power, right? Because there are Cameroonians that have worked at Google DeepMind. I have a classmate in Polytechnic that is currently in Google DeepMind, right? I have classmates that
Wow.
are doing research in AI companies, right? And um, there have been Cameroonians at Meta AI. There have been Cameroonians working in all these different places that have a very good understanding of these systems and that could be the ones that could pioneer these spaces for us Africans in our context. And there is a lot that they are already doing. When I was in Polytechnic, we had these alumni, right, that organized a machine learning competition in our school. I think the first edition was when I was in fourth year, and ever since then it's been a yearly event, right? And he purchased a PC, right? A very performance PC, expensive GPU, tons of RAM, and kept it in our lab. And that was kind of like our our machine learning laboratory equipment, right?
Right.
And
Because
he
that's what you
footed
need,
the
right? You need
bill,
a high
right?
performance.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of effort done, but I don't see these guys being enabled. I think even from a government perspective, we have here a minister of innovation or whatever that title is, and they have no idea what large language models are. We have barely functioning websites, and it's just really, I wouldn't say the problem is incompetence because we have competent people, but we
Hmm.
just are not putting the competent people in a place where they are able to to positively impact the communities as they should be doing. Yeah.
Very interesting. So again, we always, when we're talking about Africa, we always seem to find our way, always recoil back into politics and poor governments, and yeah, just so
Yeah. Unfortunately.
disenabling society. Unfortunate, really, which is really unfortunate. Um, so okay, that's really interesting. Now now that we're on the topic of education, I mean, that we can just zero in on that for a second because I've been one who's been really affected by the education system in Africa. I've always had an internal conflict with the education system in Cameroon. I mean, first of all, because of its lack of specificity, um, and just the fact that we have tons and tons of graduates leaving college and leaving this universities and doing PhDs. Hundreds of thousands of people leaving university every single year, but nothing's changing in the country. So I've been heavily disillusioned heavily disillusioned with university, and that has really affected my life a lot. So that's why it's taken me, such a very long time to actually get a degree in computer engineering. Because if all things were up to me, I would have quit school a long time ago. But but anyway, because education and schooling are very different things. I mean, it's something you definitely agree with. But for the most part in your life, you were self-taught. You taught yourself how to read. You taught yourself how to code. You've always been a reader. You've always been a voracious reader of stuff. I mean, there was a time I saw you in high school when we were in opposite. You were reading a complicated science book. I think it was Brian Cox, something.
Yeah. I know that when I was in high school, I was just reading a bunch of things. I think I was even going deep into Einstein's theory of
Exactly.
relativity. I just love to read. Yeah.
Absolutely. So and these are things that no one tells us back home. The importance of self-education and that and all of that. So talking about AI and education. Is it possible that even with little acceptance, even with little hospitality to this thing called AI, we could personalize education in Africa's under-resourced schools? I mean, because it's quite evident that our schools are under-resourced, based by the fact that we are what we're not producing anything that really competes globally, right? Think tangible stuff. So we don't
Yeah.
have labs, we don't have stuff. So what role can AI play in education in Africa, even with just little acceptance?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that comes to mind, right, is just the lack of staff. I think you and I were privileged to go to one of the best schools, I think, in the country, but there's a lot of students that have to sit in the classroom, and there are 100 of them, and there's one teacher, and the way the learning process is that learning is a process of asking questions.
Yeah,
It's a back and forth between somebody that is curious and somebody that can fulfill the curiosity of the other
I
person,
love that. I
and
love that.
that is sorely lacking. Yeah, and that is sorely lacking. In our context, just because of the lack of teachers. You go to schools in some village somewhere, and they barely have a place to sit. They probably sit somewhere under a tree or something. So I think first AI can help just to bridge that gap, in being able to say, okay, you might not have full access to your teacher, right? But here's how you can study on your own, right? It's the thing that can summarize your notes to you like you're 5 years old. It's the thing that can put a funny spin on how you're understanding economics, right? If you're a chess player, it could break it down to you in chess terms, right? And just really have that personalized sense of education that anybody that is learning would want to have, in a teacher. I think there's that. But in general, even looking at it from a pedagogical perspective, there's just the data driven decision part of it, right? So where if we have schools that are gathering data, right, then we have schools that are able to leverage data to make better decisions for their students. You see, it means that if we're able to say that a lot of our students are fitting a particular course of, or a lot of students or from this part of town, like just having that data that allows us to make the learning process simply better. I don't think that there is necessarily a rule that has to dictate that we have to have the same length of a period for every subject, right? It's possible that we could do just 1 hour of English and then 3 hours of maths.
Absolutely.
Having, yes, like being able to gather data on these kinds of things means we are able to make better decisions to optimize our learning process. Our educational environments, and just what we are doing could be grounded in data that we're collecting in our context for us as well. Yeah, I think there's large opportunity for digital, for e-learning in Africa, because I think it reduces the barrier to entry for people to learn. And I've always been a big proponent of education, and not what we have today. And I'm trying to look for a word for it, but I don't have one. It's school is not where people get educated. School is a system. It's because education to me is intentional, right? It's looking for information that allows you to solve problems that you want to solve, right? Because I think life is a
Nailed it.
it's a journey of looking or going towards the problems that you want to contend with, right? And education is that process of being able or getting the tools that you need to deal with the problems that you want to face. And right now, especially in Cameroon, it's like school is just one system. You're born, you get into nursery school, you get into primary school, then you get into high school, you get your GCE A level, and then you have to go into university, and then you have to get a first degree. Like, it's like some sort of religion. Like, it's almost religious in nature, right? Where
more.
Yeah, where we should be asking ourselves, or we should have better orientation. Me from a young age, and maybe I was fortunate enough to have more liberal parents. They allowed me to explore a bunch of things, and they allowed me to make decisions for myself, for where I wanted to go to. And by the time I was writing the entrance exam to go to Polytechnic, the only reason why I wrote it was because they had a computer science department. That's what I wanted to do, right? That had been what I always wanted to do. But fast forward, I'm in second year, it's the end of second year, and I'm talking with most of my classmates, and I realized that these guys don't know what they want to do, right? They just wrote the entrance exam, well, because they had been topping their class. They weren't really topping their class for any specific reason other than that they were smart, and they've been topping their class, and they get out of high school and they are told, hey, this is where all the smart people go to. And they also just write the entrance exam, they get accepted, and they are really just passing for the sake of passing, But I feel like personally for me, my education was always very intentional, because it was like, this is what I'm doing, this is how it's helping me to be able to do this, and just even in the computer science department, that was where I co-founded NK Technologies with my friends Asafo and Hubert, and I was always practically applying all what I was learning in class, or seeing practically how I could apply all what I was learning in class. And so learning for me was always that very intentional process of, I know why I need these things. And even if I go with this, and even if I leave from here without a degree, I know what I've gotten, And it's like, we don't have that orientation, and that's why every time I'm talking to people that are younger than me, or people that are where I was before, I always try to get them to get that orientation, right, into what are you trying to be. Don't just try to get a degree because you were told that you should get a degree, and then immediately after a degree you get a job, because that's not how life works, right? And even if that's how life works, I think it's a miserable way to live, to just fit into that system. I will tell people that try to look for problems that you want to contend with, right? It shows that there's a base level of education that one has to have to even ask themselves that kind of question.
Sure.
But I think when you're in high school, it's a good time where you should be having conversations with people in the field. Have a conversation with the medical doctor. What do they do on their day to day? Have a conversation with an engineer, an electrical engineer, somebody that is doing public health, software engineer, and try to get a feel for what it is or the problems that you want to contend with in life. And then you are getting that education. Like there's the University of YouTube, right? And people that are in that mindset of being educated can always leverage that to learn, because there's some people that don't really care about education like that, but
Cool.
yeah, so yeah, so I think you just try to change that culture, that culture shift from education for the sake of it. You go to school, get a degree, get a PhD to become a professor, to teach other people, to get a degree, to get a PhD, and it's just this never-ending cycle of education for the sake of it. But I think education, we get knowledge for it to be used practically. And so I think that's one thing that we could work on, just in trying to shift that culture away from education just for the sake of education.
And that is something that AI can teach us. That is something AI can help us with. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because it's the one thing that allows people to understand that they have agency in their education, that allows them to know that they are an actor in how they are learning about the world and in what they are learning and in how it could be applied. Yes. So I think it would be a very useful tool in changing that culture, and just in general helping all the efforts that we have around education, and just democratizing education for the less privileged of us in our country and in that context.
I feel extremely good about this last dart that you just darted, because it's almost like a validation of my thoughts, and something I've always in my beliefs since I was a kid in high school, because I've always known there is something off about the way we learn it, right? Because again, in my own words, just to corroborate what you're saying, and I perfectly 100% accept everything as you said. I concede 100%. Learning or education, schooling, without not geared towards the solving of a particular problem is totally pointless, right? And I also love the personalization aspect, the personal aspect that you talk, because it's very personal. We do not have the same problems in life, right? We can never have the same problems because we come from different places, different families. So for one person, the only education he might need to set him up for the rest of his life is just how to play a guitar, right? And he needs to educate himself on how to play guitar. And when he educates himself on that, and he gets good at it, and the problem he's solving with that is, okay, people need good music. People need good sounds when they're just sitting and chilling on the bar and having a drink with a friend. And if you can know how to play that, and solve that problem of people not having good music at the bar, that makes him just totally indispensable, and he feels useful. He feels useful. He feels good about himself. He's solved a particular problem, and that just keeps him motivated. And who knows what the upper limit to that is. I really love everything you said, and I'll be definitely I'll be definitely revisiting this part of the conversation.
And I think just to add to that, right, because a lot of times when I'm considering a concept in my mind, I like to do this thing that is, I think, more commonly known as thinking from first principle, trying to look at something from its origin, right? And one thing, like when I think about education, I try to go back to what education was before we had this system that we have today. And one thing that or that comes to my mind is education usually, in those, like, if you want to go 15th century, was really for like the royals, you see. And when you're the firstborn son of the king, you're educated. And you're educated because you're going to be king, right? And you are taught history, you're taught geography, because those things are imperative for you to know to fulfill the duties you are going to fulfill. You're also taught how to fight, right? Because you need to know how to fight. You're taught language, how to speak, probably multiple languages, depending on the number of allies your kingdom has. You're taught etiquette, because etiquette is education as well. Just knowing how to behave in different social circumstances.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're taught finance, because you're managing a nation's coffers. So that's how I see education. It's not just what we have as the intellectual things that we have today. It's not just maths. It's everything for how a human being should live in the way they have to live, right? And that's why, for example, even when you look into the Renaissance, in France, Italy, and all these things, a very significant portion of education was apprenticeship. There's this painter, and if I want to be a painter too, I just go stay with them. I help them in tasks. Right. I learn from what they're doing, and that is education. I don't think everybody has to get a degree. You could really just leave from high school and be an intern at the company, and you do very, very great, because that is apprenticeship. It could really be just following somebody around and doing electrical wiring, and you could very well learn how to be an electrical, engineer just from doing that. And so I think there's that lost sense of things like apprenticeship, or just the fact that we are leaving so much out of what we call education, just teaching people just how to be, moral human beings, or just how to behave socially, or just how to manage finances, and I think education can be much broader than what we are doing today. So that was just what I wanted to add in the first principle way of looking at it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So as you were saying that, a question just came to mind. What do you say about the debate between a generalist versus a specialist? Who do you think who has the most propensity to be to be the better one?
Okay, so I think there was a time in our timeline as a species when there was no such thing as a specialist, but the more we know, the more there is to know, and then there is a point where we can't do without having specialists, right? But what I think is that both are very useful, but again, I think it depends on what exactly somebody is setting out to do, you see. And I'm of the opinion that usually leaders have to be generalists, because if I'm leading a set of people, that means I think it's just from the definition, we would always encounter a multi-dimensional set of problems, you see. And if I'm not well equipped enough to be able to, at the very least, understand and contend with those problems, then I cannot lead. Because leadership is not always necessarily doing it, but it's understanding it enough to request for who can help or support to do stuff. And that is where I think specialists now come into the play. And I really like the analogy of a hospital. For much of my life, I really did not know how hospitals worked. Like really understood how hospital worked till I was an adult, and I was going through the process, and you come in and you say you have this symptom, you're feeling this pain here, and then somebody takes all the data, right, of your present predicament, and you meet a general practitioner, and this is somebody that has diverse set of knowledge in different fields, just understands on a general basis, more or less what's happening in a human body. And this person is able to assess the issue, or assess what needs to be assessed, like some sort of meta assessment. And when they do that, then they are able to say, okay, you need to see this specialist, and he's going to do this exam. And then when he does this exam, then we can continue from there. But ultimately, it's still the general practitioner that is making the decisions, but the specialist is coming in with expert opinion. And I think that those two roles are very important, where we need people that are generally trained, that have fundamental understanding of multiple domains to lead people globally as a species, or even in more niche domains. And then you have the experts. They are the ones that can come in, with very deep knowledge on particular topics and have very consequential, significant conversations around that. And I think in my personal experience, being a co-founder, I was more of I'm a tech head, coder and all of this, but I've come to realize that I've had to be a more rounded person, if I'm to build a company that has to go somewhere someday, just so that means understanding accounting, understanding finance, understanding what investors are looking at, understanding the markets,
Law,
economics,
right?
and So that's kind of like my take on the whole thing.
Wow, it's really interesting. I've never heard anyone break it down like that. I really love the analogy you gave about the hospitals, the general practitioner and the expert, the specialists. It's really interesting because having that combo to some degree also saves time, right? Because the whole process
Yeah.
of getting a patient, sorry, to exactly where he or she needs to be, and getting them exactly there, and making sure that that's the right place is very streamlined, and
Yeah.
it happens much quicker. So I think it's just like you said, having that balance between, okay, we need people who are very versatile and kind of this is a bad term, not really exactly what it means to be a generalist, but they are jack of all trades, the master of
Yeah.
none. And then we
Yeah.
also need to have those people who are very niche down into one particular thing. Wow, very very interesting perspective from you. Now we've touched on several aspects, several domains, such as education. We've talked about the history of AI. We've talked about how AI can help personalize education. And now I want to get into something that is very personal to me, because this is a problem that I have been very much plagued with for the rest of my life. It's a problem that has hijacked my consciousness for almost every waking day for me is really just thinking about this problem. It's the problem of poverty. Now it's multifaceted, yes, of course, but when we bring it down to the African context, I think it's not unreasonable to say that the main problem, the major cause of poverty and suffering in Africa is bad governance. So that leads me to the question of, with the proliferation of AI, with the advancements in AI, with the gradual adoption of AI, which happens to be somehow decentralized, by the way. I mean, it's not entirely decentralized, but I mean, anyone with an internet connection can hold massive amounts of power in their hand. So with the gradual adoption of this technology, where do you see How do you see AI solving the problem of poverty as a consequence of bad governance?
Okay. So the way I see AI, right, is especially, and I think this really relates more to large language models, is that suddenly we have a semantic index for knowledge as a species. So um, to kind of break down like that, I would go back to when we started having people that were literate. At first, literacy was a specialization. There were specific people that knew how to read and write, and if you wanted to write a letter, you probably have to go to somebody, you dictate to write it out for you, send it. When your response comes, he would get it out and read it out to you. So literacy was it was a specialization, and then suddenly the printing press happened. Literacy became ubiquitous, and so everybody knew how to read, or almost everybody knew how to read. And we are in the situation that we are in today when almost everybody can read and write. And what that meant was that the average person had access to the knowledge of books, because at first the average person could not leverage the information that was in books, you see. And similarly, the average person could not contribute to books. And understanding that books as a technology are very important to where we have come as a species, because having information passed
Yeah,
down
yeah,
is allowing us to leverage on the efforts of people that have come before us, you see. And I think this is a very similar thing that is happening, because we live now in an age where information is ever so rapidly increasing. The amount of information available to you is increasing at an increasing rate, and we have this truckload of information that's available online. But up until now, we really didn't have a semantic way to index it. Like, you could do a search, right? But the search was really just, looking through, seeing if characters match, and giving you that. And but that's not semantic. That has nothing to do with any underlying meaning of words. And now we are at a stage where computers, to some degree, can process the semantics of words that we use. And what that means is that the average person now not only has access to this information, but has a very efficient way of accessing this information that is available to them. And when that when we have events like this that happen, I think on a global level, usually that means that there's always higher levels of productivity, innovation, just across the board, because now you can be able to read up on rocket science and build Africa's next SpaceX, right? And you wouldn't have to get a master's degree to do that, and you wouldn't have to go through all the hoops, you see. And this tool is what is going to allow us to be more productive. Is going to empower us. But I think it's a tool like any other, and like they say, give a bunch of swords to people and the number of deaths will also arise.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a tool that can be used, for good or for evil. I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe, or I think from experience, that humanity has used most of our tools more for good than we have done for evil. So I think it's a net plus to just what we can do as a species. And every time that the barrier for access into being productive, into innovation is reduced, that means that we have more people contributing to what we are doing as a species. And that just means that we're able to innovate better, to innovate faster, to create more, to create faster. And that productivity usually always amounts to increased standards of living, reduced levels of poverty, empowerment. if we have better systems to just educate people, that means the average person is more educated in our country, and it means that the techniques that these governments use to fool us, are less efficient.
Less
So
consequential, yeah.
these are just things that could, yes, I think it's a positive net addition to what we're doing. Definitely think it's something that will reduce general poverty levels. But there's one thing that I want to highlight. There's this a lot of times when we're discussing population, we discuss the mean, the average, and sometimes I don't know how familiar you are with statistics, but you could have the mean of something increase and the standard deviation increase as well. You see, and you could end up in a scenario where we have the average person that is in far better conditions than they have ever been in the history of humanity, and yet we have even bigger gaps between the poor and the rich, and we have even poorer people than have ever existed in the history of humanity, and even richer people than have ever existed in the history of humanity. So I think there's a lot of nuance to be had there in how exactly are we making sure that as a species we are improving, but in a way that isn't very detrimental to people at the extremes. So yeah.
That is incredible. So it's actually possible that we could be moving at a certain speed that is detrimental to the people at the extremes. It's very interesting. So,
Yeah.
we are almost coming to the close of this interview. So if we could get from you, what message would you like to leave the audience with respect to AI, its role, any piece of advice? If you had 2 minutes or less to give your best advice to someone in high school, someone who's confused and someone who doesn't know what to do, and is hearing about all this AI hype and the future of AI, and hearing words like sentience, AI is going to take our jobs. What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, I think I would say that you should go out there and experience AI, get a feel for it. I think we're in a place where people are simultaneously um, underestimating and overestimating AI, right? Like, it's not intelligent, but it's such a powerful tool that could change anything that you are doing, right? I've seen people go from doing what would take 8 hours of work, a full day of work, to doing it in 20 minutes. You see, so go out there, explore tools. Yeah, like it's crazy. Go out there, get a feel for these tools yourself. Let your creativity and ingenuity shine, because it's a tool that you can use to better yourself, to be more productive. And there's so many ways to use these tools. Like you could go online and they would list you five ways to use AI to be more productive. But there's so many ways that people have not yet thought about. So I would tell people to just go out there, play with these tools, get to experience them, try new stuff, and yeah, you would definitely be more productive. You'll be able to do more, and just be cautious. Make sure you're fact checking your LLMs. Make sure you're fact checking what you see online. And yeah, it's looking good for the human species.
Love that. Love that. Well, we've heard it from the man himself. Go out there and experience AI, play with it, let it, let it guide you, let it boost your creativity. It's not there to replace your intelligence. It's there to just make it shine even brighter. This was
Yeah, definitely.
the very first interview on the Through My Lens podcast. It's an absolute pleasure listening to this very intelligent young man right here. So where can people find you? You know, if people wanna get to know you, want to talk with you, people wanna collab with you in something. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not on social media like that. I don't have an Instagram account. But I'm on I'm on Twitter a lot. I think my handle is Babs number two. I think it's
Babs
evident
number
from my
two.
name,
All right.
so you can find me. Yeah, Babs number two. I'm on Twitter a lot. I talk a lot, and I'm really open to talking with a diverse set of people. I love hearing different perspectives on things.
That's incredible. Well, there's no better way of closing this by just saying immense thank you, Director Babala Mucha, for doing this, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you because I truly believe that
Definitely.
you could be part of this journey with me and the audience, and yeah, and we could definitely achieve great things together. Thank you once again for joining the
Sure.
podcast, and yeah, wishing you all the best.
Thank you for having me.